my cat purring? I'm covered in cat fur. I've been snuggling my cat and that's why he's loving life right there. I'm hoping it's not too distracting. It'd be funny now if you can't even hear it. Anyways, hello, how are we all? In today's video, I'm going to be telling you all about a multi-millionaire man called Frank Black. As always, I'm going to try and keep this into a short because I already went off on a tangent about my cat. So, that was so low. So, let's get right into it, shall we? Sorry, just trying to find my little clips. This is Frank Black. And as I said before, Frank Black was a multi-millionaire businessman. Businessman. Is it one word? No. Let me set the scene. Okay, it's a Saturday, 24th of February 1996, and Frank Black, who was 58 at this time, was on a flight to West Palm Beach, Florida. I'm just going to remind you again, multi-millionaire man. He was the owner of a bus company in New Jersey, and he was on his way to Florida to meet with a new industry Nikki? He was on his way to Florida to meet with a new industry contact. He wasn't planning on being gone long. Like, he told his family he'd be back on the Monday, just a couple of days away in Florida. The person he was going to meet in Florida was a woman that went by the name of Mia Giordano, and she claimed to represent a company called Maldives Exporting. Now, prior to meeting, she gave Black a full description of what she looked like so that he would be able to find her easily. The description she gave him was that she was 5'1" and blonde. Now, the reason why he needed to be able to find her easily was because she was going to the airport to pick him up, because she was going to take him to meet others that were involved in the business deal. Now, one thing he hadn't told anybody was that he was planning on retiring after closing this business deal. Like, obviously he told his family, but that's how we know, but he hadn't made it like a big thing. Now, let's fast forward to the Monday, the day that he said he was going to return, but didn't. And because he didn't, his family contacted the New Jersey State Police. Detective Sergeant Lee Liddy was one of the state detectives that was assigned to the case. You know, the missing persons case. He said that Frank wasn't the kind of guy who would just walk away from business. So now we understand the, alarm over the fact that he had not returned home. The reason he said he was going to go home on the Monday is because he had a business meeting. So the fact that he didn't turn up to that business meeting, everyone was like, where could he be? Black's daughter Leanna and his girlfriend and office manager Sally Roberts were interviewed by the New Jersey investigators. My toe just clicked so bad. One moment. In the interview, his daughter said that the important meeting that he had missed out on was actually with her to discuss the sale of his business. After finishing up the interviews with the daughter and the girlfriend, they went and interviewed the travel agent that booked Black's trip. And it was confirmed that Black only purchased a one-way ticket to Florida. And the airline records showed that he did actually board the plane. So we know he's in Florida, and that's all they knew at this point, is that he was in Florida for a fact. But he hadn't checked into any hotels since getting there. They investigated further. Obviously, they needed to find more answers, and they found out that his credit card had actually been used after he had landed in Florida. After finding these records, the Jersey detectives contacted the Fort Pierce office of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. FDLE Special Agent Michael Driscoll was assigned to the case. When talking about it, he said, Frank Black's credit card was used at the Embassy Suites in Riviera Beach between approximately 1 in the morning and 2 in the morning. And then he goes on to say, and then at 4 o'clock in the morning, his credit card, a different credit card, but still Frank's credit card, was used to purchase gas at a gasoline station in North Miami. Now, this seemed very strange to them because he hadn't rented a car. So how did he get to North Miami? How was he there in such a short amount of time? My cat's loving life. Oh, he looks adorable. I would show you, but that means moving my entire setup, and no. The state agent then questioned the employee that was working at the gas station on February 25th. But when they showed him a photo of Black, he didn't recognize him. But the gas pumps actually had credit card slots, so that means that there's hardly any interaction between the employees and the customers. The worker also said that he didn't recall seeing anyone that fit the description of Mia Giordano. Michael Driscoll contacted the Florida Secretary of State Corporation Division to try and get an address for Valdez Exporting, but he actually found that there was no company registered in that name in this state. After all of this, he actually tried to just find Mia Giordano herself. He said, "We did a very extensive search to identify any Mia Giordano in Florida, and we couldn't find any Mia Giordanos in Florida, or any that would even come remotely close." Things are already sketchy. Like, how are they only this far into the investigation? And it's the sketchiness is beyond, isn't it? It is now March 1st, and a detective flew to where Black was last thought to be. And at this point, nobody had heard from Black in around 5 days. And because it had been nearly a week, the detectives fully believed that Black had been met with some sort of foul play. And their most likely suspect at this point, Mia Giordano. Now, they were focusing on the phone calls that Black had received on the few days leading up to his trip to Florida. One of the contacts traced back to a woman that went by the name of Lisa Costello, and the call showed that it came from a rented townhouse in Jupiter. Now, the description of this woman doesn't fully fit the description that Mia Giordano gave to Frank Black about what she looked like. For example, she wasn't blonde, but she was 5'1". Now, the reason why they were looking so close into this contact was because the times of these phone calls matched up to the same time that Black was apparently setting up meetings with Mia Giordano. Lee Liddy said, "Mia Giordano was a fictitious figure. She never existed. Mia Giordano was actually Lisa Costello." Sketchier and sketchier by the second. Now that the detectives had come to this conclusion, they took a photo of Costello to the hotel where the credit card had been used. This hotel was on the strip of Riviera Beach, and they asked to speak to the person that was working the front desk on the morning in question. This woman was called Karen Voorhees. Now, she was shown a photo of Frank Black, but didn't recognize him. But she did remember that around 2 o'clock in the morning, a woman with dark hair asked for a room in the hotel. But the hotel was fully booked, so she asked to use the phone to call other hotels to see if they had any availability. And to make these phone calls, she used Black's credit card. The time that she used the phone matches the exact time that shows up in Black's credit card records. So they questioned Voorhees on the woman's appearance, and she said that she had dark hair and was around 5 foot. Because this is such a basic, description of someone, dark hair, 5 foot something, that's the person across the street. It's a very basic description of someone. They actually showed Voorhees a lineup of 6 women, photos, a lineup, they just brought 6 women with them, photos of 6 women that fit the description, and she immediately pointed out Lisa Costello and said, "That's her." This now made Lisa Costello a prime suspect in the case. Now that they had their sights set on Costello, they investigated her more, obviously, and found that she actually rented a car before going to pick up Frank Black from the airport, and then found the car at the airport rental lot. But after looking closely into the car and examining it, oh, Nick, that's embarrassing. Examining it, they found that there was no traces of Frank Black in the car. They were trying so hard at this point to get more hard evidence on Costello because they had no physical evidence that attached her to Black's disappearance. So they began following her around for days to try and figure out her day-to-day routines and who her everyday contacts were, all that jazz. Not too long after they started following her around, they found out that she was dating a man called Alan Mackley. Then they started following him around because they found out that, just like Frank Black, Mackley owned a bus company in New Jersey. And something interesting, Black and Mackley had known each other for pretty much all their lives, but they weren't friends. Over time, they'd actually built up quite a rivalry between them because they were both working in the same industry, in the same place, owning businesses in the same industry, in the same place. And they were only 10 miles away from each other, meaning that they were both trying to get the same contacts, the same businesses, etc., etc. And after investigating even more, deeper and deeper, they found out that there was actually phone calls made to Black from Mackley's Florida home. They obviously found this very strange because Black and Mackley were rivals, so why are they chatting on the phone? So they went to Black's bus company to, have a little bit of a feel around, see what everyone was saying. They spoke to Sally Roberts, and she revealed that Black and Mackley actually used to be friends, but because of what they did for a living, it made them enemies. She went on to talk about the last time Black and Mackley were seen together. This would be in January of 1996 at an industry banquet. Black was apparently just having a conversation with somebody, and Mackley approached him and threatened him because Black had apparently stolen one of his big contacts, saying that he was going to get him and put him under. Now, this doesn't directly state that he's going to do something, really bad, like kill him. It could just mean, going to do something to the business, something like that. But this did actually scare Black a little bit and didn't show up to any meetings or events or anything that Mackley could possibly be at without anyone else with him. The investigators then questioned Mackley on whether he had spoken to Black recently. Mackley just straight up denied having any sort of contact with Black leading up to his arrival in Florida. Now, this didn't make any sense to the investigators because there are records that show that there were phone calls made to Black's business from Mackley's Florida home just before he left for Florida. Why are you lying? Well, I mean, obviously there's an obvious reason why you're lying, but come on, now you just look silly. Him lying about it just proves to the investigators that something's wrong. He's hiding something. At this point, the investigators had pretty much come to the conclusion that Costello and Mackley had killed Frank Black, but didn't have anywhere near enough evidence that would tie them to the case. They got in contact with Assistant State Attorney Robert Belangi. They turned to him because they wanted to use wiretaps, but you need a very compelling reason for them to allow you to listen into someone's phone call conversations. Like, you can't just tap into anybody's phone and listen to what they're telling their mother. There's got to be a good reason. So they fill out any and all applications that they needed to be able to move forward with this. They were obviously hoping for a lot of conversations between Mackley and Costello, but they were actually very disappointed because very few conversations actually took place. This was down to the fact that Costello was now living with Mackley, so any conversations they were going to have about the situation wasn't going to be done over the phone. They could just chat in the comfort of their own home. This meant that if the investigators wanted to hear any sort of incriminating conversations, then they'd have to bug the house. Assistant State Attorney Lawrence Merman had his fingers crossed that they had enough evidence that would allow them to do this. Be given permission to go into someone's house and plant microphones. As you can imagine, it's a very, very, very difficult thing to be allowed to do. There are very few cases where this is allowed, but with everything that they brought up and all of their concerns, a judge signed a warrant and the investigators wasted no time in bugging the house. They sat outside in their vehicle just waiting and listening for that one conversation. But the couple did not make this easy. And the investigators actually believed that the couple knew that they were listening, because every time the topic would come up, they'd turn up the radio in the kitchen. So all the investigators could hear was music. Like, they have hours and hours and hours of audio footage of just music. I mean, we all love a bit of smooth jazz, but I think the investigators were hoping for a little bit more. So obviously this left them with no evidence at all. Chief Assistant State Attorney Dave Morgan said, "It looks like Alan Mackley's gotten away with murder." And this looks like it could have been the case at this point because they had no evidence on them. They were staying silent, like they weren't going around saying anything, and Black's body hadn't turned up. So there was nothing directly tying them to the case. Now it gets to June of 1996 and Black's body still has not been found. They check every morgue in the area and had no luck. Meaning that if Costello and Mackley were the killers, they knew what they were doing when it came to hiding a body. Everyone was obviously very frustrated that they hadn't been able to progress in the investigation. Michael Driscoll told his friend, FBI Special Agent Jay Miller, all about his frustrations surrounding the case, which led Miller telling Driscoll that if he needed any help with the case, he'd be happy to oblige. So in June of 1996, Jay Miller was assigned to the case out of the FBI Fort Pierce Resident Agency. And with him now working on the case, they all agreed that they needed to go back to the start and look even closer into everything that they had. Now the investigators had an idea that could end up jeopardizing their entire situation, their entire case. They wanted to present Costello with a subpoena, hoping that she would turn against Mackley and reveal any information that she knew. And because of the subpoena, if she was to confess to anything that would go against herself, for example, if she confessed to the murder, they couldn't use that against her. So it was really putting the investigation at risk, but like, what else did they have? Like, what other choice? Now, on the 13th of June 1996, Lisa Costello appeared before a Florida grand jury. As you can probably guess, she was no help. She was very hostile the entire time and just ignored all of the questions, just stayed silent. In hopes that it would push her to answer the questions, the judge told her that she would be jailed for contempt if she didn't answer the investigators. But this didn't do anything. She just continued to ignore the questions, which just confirmed to everybody that she was involved with the disappearance of Frank Black. Now, as we can see, the idea that the investigators had did in fact jeopardize the investigation. Because now Costello was behind bars, leaving no witnesses to what could have happened. And because of this, they feared that the case was now a dead end. But Michael Driscoll was then contacted by someone, a witness, that may know something about the disappearance of Frank Black, but was too scared to say anything. There was two reasons why they were scared to come forward. One was because they were scared of Mackley, understandable, and the other one was because they were concerned about their own involvement. This witness went by the name of Bill Anderson, who was actually a former Marine pilot. He was also one of Mackley's closest friends. So they interviewed him in his Florida home, and they found out that he also owned a bus company in New Jersey. What is it with bus companies? I hadn't really thought about their existence until researching this. Like, why did everybody own a bus company? I mean, I get it, you get your money's worth, but... All three of the investigators, them being Michael Driscoll, Jay Miller, and Robert Belangi, were also former Marines. And now Bill Anderson was also a Marine. So they were all hoping that this would make some kind of bond between them and would make Anderson want to spill the beans. Anderson told the investigators that his friendship with Mackley was a bit rocky at this point in time, like it had been for a little bit. But when it came to the relationship between Mackley and Black, he was a little more hesitant to reveal any details. So he didn't really reveal much there and then, but over time, they did end up creating that bond that they wanted. And it did give Anderson the confidence that he needed to say what he wanted to say. So it's now early August, and the investigators think that Anderson is ready to talk. They approached him with the same deal that they gave Costello. They gave him a subpoena, meaning that if he said anything about the case, they couldn't use it against him. But he didn't stay quiet like Costello did. He told them everything they needed to know, starting with the fact that Mackley had bought a plane earlier on in the year. And because Anderson used to be a Marine pilot, Mackley asked him to be his private pilot, and in return, Anderson could use the plane whenever he wanted. Now we're going back to March 1996, and Anderson is staying in a hotel in Leesburg, Florida. He had to be there to supervise any repairs that were going on with the plane. While he was there, he was contacted by Mackley. Mackley told Anderson that he needed to take the plane out over the ocean, but there was a problem with this because the plane needed to be grounded for repairs for the next few days. He suggested, renting another plane to take out, but Mackley was adamant that he had to use his own plane. And this was because he didn't want anybody else knowing about the flight. Curiouser and curiouser. Obviously being, very confused by this, Anderson asks why. And this is where the story gets interesting. Mackley told Anderson that he shot Frank Black. He continued with his story, saying that he wrapped his body in plastic and threw him into the ocean, but his body didn't sink. So he stabbed the bag and Black, hoping that it would make everything sink, and it did. But now he was worried that it might have resurfaced. so he wanted to take the plane out to double check. So now that clears up why he wanted to take his own plane and didn't want anybody to know about the flight. What a sketchy man. Well, I mean, obviously he killed a person, but... Why did I close this? I still need to use it. Obviously, after hearing all of this, Anderson is beyond shocked. Now, he didn't like Black either, because obviously they're in the same industry again, and he's close friends with Mackley. You know, that's your enemy, they'll be mine too. Don't worry, bestie, I got your back. But he couldn't make sense of why it got to this point. If they were just business rivals, you know, they were arguing over a contact, and it resulted in one of them shooting the other one and dumping the body in the ocean. Bus companies are... It's a scary business. Who would have thought? Who would have thought?
Huh? Who would have thought? Not me.
So, you know, following the confusion, Anderson tells Mackley he's not going to do it. You know, he's not going to get involved. He's already been involved too much, you know, with you confessing to him. Man's in a whirlwind. Leave him be for 5. Now, where did this murder happen? Good question. I've got the information right here. I will tell you momentarily. Anderson told the investigators that Mackley murdered Black in the foyer of his home. This just raises more questions. It did with me when I first researched this whole thing. Like, I thought they were enemies. What's he doing at his house? Why is Black going over? Why is he in the foyer? Make it make sense. Don't worry, it does make sense in the end. But we'll get to that. Ooh, I love building tension. Now, obviously, this story from Anderson wasn't enough evidence, even though it was a confession. You know, it was the story of Mackley's confession. It still wasn't physical evidence. Like, when it would get to court, it would be very much a he said, she said type of situation. So they needed hard proof. So they told Anderson that they needed him to record himself having a conversation with Mackley, like rehashing the confession conversation. At first, Anderson didn't really want to wear a wire, and this is because of a situation that had happened in the past. Mackley told Anderson about someone he knew in New Jersey that had been convicted of a crime because somebody wore a wire. And Mackley even said, if anyone ever wore a wire around me, I'd kill them. Now, the investigators obviously weren't going to allow this to happen to Anderson and promised him police protection. And because of this, he agreed to wear the wire. Now, Anderson was very, very nervous about this. I mean, understandable. But the investigators reassured him and just told him to be confident. Like, don't show you're nervous because you're just going to be talking to your friend. Just be confident about it. Relax. It's all going to be okay. You know, we love a bit of moral support. So, the plan went like this. Anderson lures Mackley back to Anderson's house, and the FBI would attach wires to Anderson and also set up a camera in the kitchen. Once everything was set up, Anderson calls Mackley, telling him that he'd been served a subpoena and wanted to discuss with him what he should do next. And Mackley does exactly what they wanted him to do. He tells Anderson that he will be right over, walks straight into it. Bless him. While they were waiting for him to arrive, some telephone repairmen showed up and started working. Obviously, like, they were just doing their job, they were innocent in all of this, but the investigators were very much aware of the fact that Mackley was paranoid that everyone was listening to him. So if he showed up and saw these 2 workers, he would immediately go to, they're undercover, they're listening to me. So the investigators quickly got out of their car and asked them to leave. They couldn't have anyone there that would jeopardize this. And they got back in the car literally seconds before Mackley turns up. There's a close one. When Mackley turned up, the investigators tried to contact Driscoll and Anderson that were in the house to, you know, tell him that he'd arrived. But they got no response. So, you know, clearly being stressed, they just kept trying, but nothing. Because obviously the radios weren't working, Driscoll and Anderson had no idea that Mackley was approaching the door. So when he knocks, Driscoll has literally seconds to hide. Once Mackley was inside, Anderson followed the plan and took him to the kitchen. He immediately shows Mackley the subpoena, but Mackley is very hesitant to talk. And when he does talk, he's talking in a whisper. And this isn't because he thought Anderson would be wearing a wire or that Anderson was like an issue right now. It was more of the fact that he was always paranoid that the police and investigators constantly had eyes on him. Hi, babe. Eventually, the paranoia got too much, and Mackley refused to keep talking in the house and turns to Anderson and says, "Let's take a walk." I know in that situation I'd be very nervous as it is, so if there's a murderer sat in front of me and says, "Let's take a walk," no, I'm good. I'm comfy in my kitchen. Thank you though. Anyways, they do end up going for a walk outside. And because the plan was for them to just stay in the kitchen, the investigators were now very concerned that Anderson was about to get hurt. My cat has now been switched out to my dog. He's a bit annoyed I'm not giving him attention right now. You'll be fine. Okay, back to the story. Mackley actually ends up walking towards where the investigators were set up. He still can't see them, but you know, I can imagine all the investigators' hearts were going pitter-patter, pitter-patter. You know, very scared that if he just looked over, they were done for. Jay Miller actually said, "My car is parked probably about 80 to 100 feet from Mackley and Anderson." That's close. Luckily, before Mackley could spot the vehicle, Anderson led him in the other direction. At this point in the investigation, they had some very incriminating statements from Mackley, but they didn't have an actual confession. Also at this point, Lisa Costello is still in jail. She'd been there for 3 months because she was charged with contempt for refusing to honour her subpoena. So they wanted to investigate her just a little bit more to see if they could find anything that would convince her to talk. So they actually go and question her old roommate, who revealed that Costello used to be a drug dealer. Like, she would deal cocaine and Rufinol. Rufinol is a tasteless sedative that will make you feel very relaxed and sometimes make you unconscious. Now it was believed that Costello had sedated Frank Black with Rufinol. With this new information, they decided to talk to Costello again and told her that if she continued to not answer the questions, she would no longer have immunity, meaning that she could actually be charged with murder. But even after all of that, she still did not say a word. Even though she stayed silent, they did feel like they already had enough evidence and felt as though they were ready to make an arrest. They had a motive, circumstantial evidence, a witness. Like, they had built a very, very strong case despite never finding Frank Black. It is now the 29th of August, 1996, and they began surveilling Mackley with aerial surveillance technology. They were keeping a very close eye on him, leading up to the big moment. A team surround the perimeter of Mackley's house, making sure that he was the only person there, like nobody else was in the property, it was just Mackley. Fast forward through the day a little bit, it is now the evening of that same day, and the arrest team approach his door. They waited and waited until Mackley came out of his house so they could arrest him in the open without having to go into his house. Eventually, he walks out of his front door with his dog on a lead, and that is when the arrest team made their move. Mackley was taken by surprise and didn't fight back at all. The man was too stunned to speak.
The woman was too stunned to speak.
This is a lovely lipstick. This is a Pat McGrath one, and it is velvety smooth. Sorry, we're in a bit of a tense moment right now. That was uncalled for, Nick. He was arrested for kidnapping and murder 7 months after the disappearance of Frank Black. After the arrest was broadcasted all over the news, someone else came forward with more information. This man was called Robert Senadazian, who was Mackley's son-in-law. In his statement, he said that he got a call on February 25th, so the day after Frank Black arrived in Florida. He received the call from Mackley, asking him to come over and help him clean. So he went over on the 26th of February and said he noticed that they'd already started major renovations in the foyer. He said that the carpet had been ripped up and a lot of the wall had been taken out. Like, they weren't just on their hands and knees scrubbing, they were fully ripping the house apart. And when Senadazian asked Mackley why he was suddenly renovating, he said that Frank Black was in his house on the Saturday. And Senadazian knew about the relationship between Black and Mackley. So he was very, very confused as to why Black was in the house. As we all are. And then Mackley said that he needed to make sure that there wasn't even a hair of Frank Black in the house. Continuing on with his statement, Senadazian was adamant that he didn't see any blood while in the house. He was asked if he questioned Mackley on what had happened between the two of them, but he said he didn't even have to ask him. He knew that something bad had happened. He went on to say that they disposed of everything they'd ripped out from the house in a local landfill. So Now they go and search through this landfill in the middle of August. They began searching for anything that could be traced back to the home. Did I mention it was August in Florida? It was a very, 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 very hot few days of investigating. The people that worked on the landfill were able to narrow down where Mackley would have dumped all of the stuff based on the month. And because of this, they were able to recover some of the carpet that they believed was from the house. They also found a vacuum cleaner that matched the description that Senadazian had given about the one that they were using to clean. They took all of this to the forensics department for analysis, but they were unable to match anything to the house. They looked further into the foyer of Mackley's house, aka the murder scene, and they found traces of what they thought could have been Frank Black's blood, but they failed to find anything that could match the DNA from the blood to Frank Black's DNA. The investigators were so determined to find any kind of hard evidence, despite always being met with dead ends. This led them to even going to supermarkets like Walmart to get receipts for when Mackley was purchasing bleach and cleaning supplies, basically anything that you'd need to clean up a murder scene. The trial was quickly approaching and the investigators were ready for this to be a very, very difficult trial because they had no physical evidence. They had no body, no weapon, and they still didn't have a full confession. But before the trial took place, the investigators found out some very disturbing information. The inmates at the jail that Mackley was at claimed that Mackley had hired someone to kill Bill Anderson. It was very clear that Mackley knew that if Anderson wasn't there to testify, they'd have to throw out the case. Anderson already had a lot of police protection, but with this new threat, the security increased immensely. They actually geared up to have Anderson and his wife put into the federal witness protection program. Like, that's how intense this was. Did my throat really need to do the gurgle wurgles right then? It's now the 20th of January 1998, and this is the day that Alan Mackley's trial began. Bill Anderson told the entire story of Mackley's confession, and the prosecutors pieced together his story with the evidence that they already had. So the story goes like this. Lisa Costello, who went by the name Mia Giordano, picked up Frank Black from the West Palm Beach airport on the evening of February 24th, 1996. She took him to Mackley's house, telling him that they were meeting other business partners, and Frank Black didn't know that he had just stepped into Alan Mackley's house. This is when they believe that Lisa Costello put Rufinol in Black's drink. Once the drug had sedated Black, Mackley took over, making Costello take Black's wallet from his pocket. This is how they got hold of his credit cards. Mackley then takes Black to the foyer, where he holds a gun to his head and shoots. And then to get rid of the evidence, he wraps up the body in plastic, as well as the weapon. He takes the body out into the ocean about 16 miles away from the shore and disposes of the body. After getting rid of the body, he returns back home to clean up anything that had blood on it. Bill Anderson's testimony tied in perfectly with the circumstantial evidence, making a very powerful case against Mackley. And all of this was enough to convince the jury. So, on the 4th of February 1998, Alan Mackley was found guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Frank Black. Now, because of the outcome of Mackley's case, Lisa Costello finally gives a full statement. She's being faced with murder charges, so it's about time that she spoke up. In the end, she pleaded to third-degree murder and false imprisonment, and was sentenced to 10 years in the Florida State Prison. Mackley's kidnapping charges were actually dropped because it was found out that Frank Black travelled to Florida on his own account. Like, he wasn't forced to go to Florida, so those charges were dropped. But the murder charges were set in stone. They were sticking. So he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, meaning that he will never step outside of the prison ever again. To this day, Frank Black's body has still never been found. bus companies? Who'd have thought? Not me. I'm with Bill Anderson that this went too far over a contact. Makeup is done. We went for a darker lip this time. That Pat McGrath lipstick. You go, Pat. I hope you enjoyed. I think it's fair to say that this whole thing escalated beyond anyone's belief. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on the little notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. And if you haven't already, check out last week's video. That's a banger. Not the case itself, but the video, can't complain. Not me tooting my own horn, I'm so sorry. I hope I see you in the next video. I'm gonna love and leave you, so toodles!